And good morning, everyone, here from Central Victoria, Australia, in Bendigo, the land of the Jar Jar Wurrung. And I'd like to acknowledge the elders of past, present, and the future, the original people of this land and their struggles, which are continuing on to this day against the same forces as we, the rest of the working class, are up against. Well, it's been a very interesting week so far, but obviously we're around at this particular time now and date. We all know what happened 19 years ago on the 11th of September 2001. Remember actually our 11th of September, which happens we'd to be about 14-hour time difference between here and the east coast of the United States. I remember that evening, because I was at a union branch meeting, and we were talking. It was a year anniversary of another event that happened on the 11th of September in 2000 when we blockaded the World Economic Forum in Melbourne. I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. I remember going that. We were all happy and we had some good resolutions passed, I do recall. And then obviously next day I was up for work and everyone was looking very sad, solemn, depressed, and acting. Everyone's on their mobile phones at the time. We didn't have iPhones back then, but we certainly had just your basic iPhones, etc. Cell phones or mobile phones. I was wondering what was going on, and people were talking about something happening in New York. And until I got to work and listened to the radio, people said, "Haven't you heard?" And I said, "No." Well, I heard what exactly? And heard snippets of information and told about the Twin Towers coming down after two planes crashed into them. Well, certainly as lots happened there in that 19 years since, as obviously the US has embarked on more wars of aggression everywhere. We've had Afghanistan, which is still continuing. We had what happened in Iraq, and also proxy wars around the world with Libya, Syria, and obviously latest attacks on Venezuela as well. Now, it's interesting. There's also another particular anniversary of likes is not more celebrating. It was obviously 11th of September 1973. I was just under 1 year old. It happened. Shows my age. The overthrow of the Allende government, the socialist government in Chile, by the Pinochet, which was fully CIA backed and funded as well. It's now released information. They're up to at the time. Henry Kissinger was right over his head in it, along with Richard Nixon, and obviously for a solid 17 years of dictatorship. It wasn't just military rule; it was outright fascism in Chile. A lot of good people were murdered, disappeared. Obviously, a lot of people had to flee as well. At that time, the Whitlam government here in Australia, the Labor government, he was eventually under a CIA-backed coup as well, but not military. It was actually through a constitutional crisis through the Governor-General. John Kerr sacked him in 1975. Obviously, sent shockwaves through Australia. At that time in 1973, he actually opened the borders to a lot of Chileans to come and live here as well, to flee Pinochet's fascist dictatorship. It's so that was the other 11th September, and obviously there were a lot of people in the Chilean community, or a lot of Latin American solidarity groups, obviously doing anniversary discussions and organising events around that, either through Zoom in, or if they are able to meet, they're able to meet and have discussions around there commemorating, well, not celebrate. I wouldn't say it's a celebration, but remembering what happened. And there's certainly some vital lessons to be learned from that. I've obviously done some talks before about fascism and obviously what it actually is. And I still recommend this book. I still highly recommend to understand what fascism is to read this. It was written in the 1930s, yes. That was the time when Hitler was coming to power, and just after, and Mussolini's rise to power, but against fascism and war, Georgy Dimitrov. I highly recommend reading this. It needs to be understood what it is. Like I've said many times over, do not use the term fascism loosely or divorced from what it actually is. It's not a separate social system. It's capitalism in crisis. It's capitalism in decay. It's capitalism in its brute dictatorship form. That's what it is, and that's what we saw in recent events. That's what we've seen in Chile under Pinochet as well. If you want to see it more in our modern times, it doesn't necessarily have to wear a swastika or carry around the symbol of the Roman Legion, the fasci. No, it can be anything. It has its own cultural identity as well. The fascism, and it could be it's on the cards. With fascism in the US will obviously have its own cultural identity as well. And how it comes in the US could be in many ways, but doesn't necessarily have to be done by street thugs either. So I highly recommend this still. I actually like to do a study with the comrades. So if anyone wishes an online live study, so if anyone wishes to put their name forward, please get in touch with me, and I'll put it in the comments below. If you are friends with me on Facebook, just send me a Facebook message. So that's going back. And so certainly there's some wider lessons to learn from that. While we have capitalism around us and while it's still in existence, the seeds of fascism are still there. Now we'll lead to what happened on the 11th of September in 2001. I'm not going to go into about the conspiracy theorists out there, what happened, although I will say something it's quite I found quite amusing. I'm not making a joke of the whole thing. It's deadly serious, but someone came up with some wacko thing that it actually didn't happen. It was all illusion. I don't know how they came to that theory, but look, unfortunately, you're going to hear a lot of stuff that comes out, and there's a lot of distrust in government, which is understandably still. And there was an investigation into the 9/11. It came out about the mid-2000s, and there was a lot of pages redacted as well. What I mean by redacted, completely blacked out. So there's a lot of questions about what happened and the lead up to it. But I highly recommend a YouTube series, or it was an American series called The Looming Tower. Called The Looming Tower. I bought the series season 1, and actually starts and it's a whole lead up to it and to 9/11. Obviously, I believe there might be another series, or there already is in the making, coming after it about after 9/11. But it actually shows the events leading right up to it. So it starts around about the late 1990s, and if you do recall, the terrorist attacks on the US embassies in East Africa, Nairobi, I believe there was a few other countries as well, and the terrorist organisation, Al Qaeda, back then. And what I'm interesting, I'm up to about episode 4, but what I'm seeing is all these competing factions within the US ruling circles. You have the CIA on one side, the FBI, military here. They're all trying to complain about this information, and obviously I do believe the investigation, what the actual big cover-up was the complete incompetence about trying to deal with this in the first place. And I do agree with George Galloway. The US empire does not need an excuse to attack anyone. You look at Vietnam, you look at what happened with Iraq and Afghanistan, they don't need an excuse. They can even start proxy wars. Basically, now they're stubbing their nose at any world organisation and doing what they want. So, I've got my views on those things. I'm not going to get into completely actually what happened, but I do recommend that. I do recommend actually watching that on YouTube. I'm watching it at the moment. Besides being quite interesting and entertaining, it's obviously it comes to show there's a lot more factual stuff that was happening at the time, and so you got to understand how it led up to that, and actually going back as well in history. And also how we got to where we are now. It's really good to even go back 30 years and what happened. I remember I was 18 years old. It was really 1990 when what we call the first Iraq war came out, when Saddam Hussein ordered his military to invade Kuwait. That was massive headlines. And yes, Australia was involved with the US about repelling the Iraqi forces. And at that time, the anti-war movement was starting to, I think, revive itself in some aspect. It's been rather dormant for many years. And I was working at a particular place in Marrickville in Sydney, and I remember all that coming across the radio that Saddam's Hussein's invaded Kuwait, etc. Now, this was actually around about that time, 1990, 91. We had the deliberate dismantling of the USSR. We also, too, in Afghanistan. Now, most of the Soviet forces retreated on out of there, and Mujahideen, Taliban actually had full control of Afghanistan as well. So there was quite a few things happening around that time. So you have to look at all the events leading up to it, and obviously the highway of death, and Kayla Morgan's talked a lot about that as well. That happened, and I remember some of the pictures in the Times magazine of a charred body on a tank. It was on the front page, the very cover page of the Times. It looks horrible about that. It was an Iraqi soldier, or tank commander, and it was just the literal butcher of a retreating armed force on the highway of death back in Iraq. Now, looking through the 1990s, obviously the economy changing and that. So obviously we had other things that happened through what was happening economically around the world. The US was asserting its dominance after the deliberate dismantling of the USSR, or if anyone wants to call it collapse, it was a complete collapse of revisionism. If you want to see what happened if about revisionism in practice, that's what you saw with the USSR. If you divide from the guidance of the teachings of Marxism and Leninism, this is what happens. So we've got a lot to learn from that as well. So what we're looking at through there, we had obviously a lot of things that happened through the 1990s, and I recall the imperialism was on the attack of the world working class. Everywhere. World working class was a major retreat. Here in Australia, we had a lot of industries shut down, move offshore to various countries around the world. Yes, China was one of them. Also India, Sri Lanka, Bhutan, Singapore even. Yeah, many other places. We lost a lot of the manufacturing up there because the capitalist class could realise that they can use cheaper sources of labour, they can increase their profit margin. That goes back to basic political economy. And which I'd like to actually do a lot of live studies on political economy too, which I've actually got an excellent copy, and I recommend grabbing this book if you can. The Communist Party of Great Britain, Marxist-Leninists. You can order it from them. Just go to their website. It's fantastic. It's an older book, written around 1930s or 40s in the USSR. And it's got questions at every chapter, and it's a great one for a group study or a live study, whatever you'd like to do, or a Zoom-in study, etc. So that's something I recommend reading. I recommend grabbing that book and understanding it as well. So about political economy and applying it to the conditions now. So during the 90s, we saw that. We saw a lot more movements of wealth going to the wealthy, a lot more, and a growing working poor, and obviously the value of our wages going down. In numbers or numerical form, they look like they were going up. In fact, they were going down in the long term. So by the mid-1990s, 1996, I do remember when John Howard won in a landslide election. He was a Conservative Prime Minister we had for just over 10 years from then on, and he intensified, under his leadership, the intense tax on the working class multiplied big time. Remember some big rallies we had in Canberra, the nation's capital, and around various capital cities, etc. And actually, in the late 90s is when I got really started to get more active in the union movement at the time. Although 1998, I was actually up in the Northern Territory at Jabiluka, stopping a uranium mine being built in a World Heritage Area. I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but yes, a lot of crazy things happen in this country as well. Fancy building a uranium mine, trying to mine uranium in the World Heritage Area. Going into that, and obviously there were certain booms, like the massive construction booms in Sydney and Melbourne, especially leading up to the 2000 Olympics. But in a lot of ways too, there were some good times as well. I'm going to say I got myself politically active and union active as well. The two are linked together. But I want to actually talk about our other 9/11 here that happened as well, when we blockaded the World Economic Forum in 2000, and actually it was held at the Crown Casino in Melbourne. A great place to have a World Economic Forum for for the super wealthy and then the wealthy. Great place in a big casino. We were actually, the people that were my generation and the younger ones, Gen X and Gen Y coming through, were actually inspired by the previous year, 1999. There was the World Economic Forum protests in Seattle. And obviously it was taking off around the world, big blockades of economic forums or World Trade Organizations, etc. Like in Zurich, or Davos in Switzerland and other places around the world, because people were suffering from the economic consequences of capitalism, which was the laissez-faire, neoliberal policies of the rich getting richer, poor getting poorer, trickle down economics, etc. So it was out of response to that, and people with massive job losses. And we had tens of thousands of people blocking that economic forum, and we used to jokingly, we jokingly said amongst ourselves, "Oh dear, they picked Melbourne out of all places to have this." They obviously in Melbourne, you get a crowd, you definitely get a big crowd. It was certainly, I had a lot of fun with it. It was a good, the actual protest itself lasted 3 days, but events leading up to it and after was a lot of stuff happening there as well. I was living in Sydney, but by then I was finished up company and I was shop steward, so I wanted some time out. I was going to check out Melbourne a lot more. I was actually originally thinking moving to Melbourne back then. And it was certainly I went there probably about a week before the actual protest itself, and obviously the lead up to it, there's a lot of intensity in the air, but it was like, people were like, let's do this. And it was actually, when it all kicked off, it was actually very empowering as well. I think people felt empowered that it was standing up to the brute policies of capitalism, of the drive for more profit, and it put the whole profit system in question. It took a long time. This hadn't been seen since probably the 1970s, something like this, to actually challenge capitalism. How dare you make profit on the expense of everybody else? And the people who organised, I think, and there was some inspiration of the past struggles of the 20s and 30s, obviously, when the Communist Party back then was in its heyday, and certainly a lot of trade union struggles as well, and realised, it was people united will never be defeated. And obviously there was also the police. Obviously, the police got brutal. That didn't surprise anyone as well. So I nearly got completely run over by a mounted police officer and on a Clydesdale horse. Not the most pleasant thing to get that to happen, especially how heavy that damn thing is. But also, there were some quite amusing moments. The then Premier of Western Australia was over there, Richard Court, who was ultra-conservative. I won't call him names, but he was just a nasty piece of work, totally anti-working class. He just despised working class people. Overall, and a lot of anti-union laws actually started in Western Australia, went nationally during the Howard era, under Richard Court's leadership. Anyway, he decided to instruct his driver to drive through all of us to get to the World Economic Forum. After being advised by police not to do so, he decided to go out of his own ignorance, arrogance, and just complete obnoxiousness, gave the order to his driver to do so. Well, stupid decision, because all of a sudden he got surrounded by thousands of people, couldn't move everyone was all over the car. I was actually nearby to it, and I think people wanted to just rip the door open and get him out and give him the hiding of his life. That didn't happen, but the police at the time, we realised what happened, so they had to actually form a pincer movement and get in there and get him out. He is ahead of a particular state, and they had to get him out of his own for safety. But the upside of that, what happened to him about a year later, he was voted out of office by a complete landslide in Western Australia, and he was actually really upset about that too. He was in tears that it happened. Well, bad luck. It couldn't happen to a better prize bastard as well. So that happened, but it was certainly things were raising questions at the time about capitalism, and like I'm seeing today, people are asking questions about the system we're under. And I think as the material conditions change in the West, a lot more people's ideas will change and start questioning the whole system and its whole existence in the first place. So that's we went over a period of 3 days. Obviously, there was a big thing about the police brutality as well, police violence towards protesters. And then we had all sorts of groups in there as well over there. And obviously, it was quite a mixed mash. Sometimes it came with quite a festival atmosphere. But and also the week after, and I remember actually we're just on the police violence about things there. What happened about the Premier of Victoria, Steve Bracks at the time, congratulated police. Yes, and that was a Labor Premier as well. Look, doesn't surprise me. I'll go about between the difference between Liberal and Labor in a minute. He congratulated the police on a great job, well done. All the capitalist press were going, well done. Protesters bad, police good. And then look, don't be all surprised, especially Murdoch's press. I don't even touch Murdoch's press. It's a waste. I'm wasting my time reading it. Anyone is. Well, what was what actually garnered us to do something at the end of that following week? We decided to have a rally against the Bracks government. And they had this because there was people hospitalised and people like brutally dealt with a bat. And there was actually one incident where a police officer just went smacked the bat and right over someone's head like that and went them in hospital. And anyway, we had and as I said, there was a few people in hospital too because of that. Very serious injuries. With that particular guy, I mean, he did recover eventually. His teeth had to be replaced. Obviously, he's fortunately not otherwise a full recovery because he was badly concussed as well. He really copped it. He was actually on the verge of, he could have actually died through severe hemorrhaging. That's how bad that blow to his head was. So, anyway, we all met down there at the bottom of, I think it was Burke and Swanson Street in Melbourne, and there was the big Nike store at the time. And it was quite amusing because we decided to have a good stuck into Nike because of the exploitation of workers in Bangladesh and elsewhere around the world in the textile industry, which is a real brutal industry. I talk about mining and other industries. Textiles is as well. It's been a very brutal industry. And we got stuck into that. And then obviously marched straight up Burke Street to the Victorian Parliament House at the time. And as we're halfway up, there was a police blockade of the whole street. Police horses riot, police ready to go. The funny side of this as well is some quick thinking. Straight on our right, we turned down another particular street. Police wondered where the hell we're going. And it was only probably lucky to be several hundred of us at the time. So it was a last minute action to organise, but text messaging and quick advertising around the place. We managed to have a crowd. We marched down this other particular street. Some quick thinking. Police didn't know what we did. We marched on the Liberal Party headquarters instead and decided to get stuck into them, the Conservative Party. And by the time we reached there and protest and becoming stuck into them, the police realised what we were up to and they come charging down, but too late by then. But in fact, fortunately, there was no violence, no arrests. They just had to protect the building and the inhabitants inside the inhabitants inside of it. Now, on that, from that as well, I mean, things did pan out afterwards, quieten down when struggle comes and ebbs and flow. But it wasn't going to be the last time anything like that happened. I mean, the following years we had the May 1st movements or M1 movements. Going to have May Day back on May the 1st, and obviously various stock exchanges and other obnoxious companies were blockaded for the next 2 or 3 years. Obviously, to raise a point, it wasn't just about having a traditional rally; it was actually about trying to put some action forward. That's basically all the lead up to that, and obviously, I was protesting that. But then a year later, as I said, we had the tragedy of 9/11 in New York, and certainly the shift in view of people. I think mainly everyone was in shock. I think here in Australia, I remember that morning, everyone just couldn't believe it. They wanted to find people to blame, obviously, and unfortunately, a lot of the Middle Eastern community here in Australia was blamed or atrocised even more. There were some radicals in that thing, but there's radicals everywhere. Let's face it, extremists everywhere. But and unfortunately, that's where we saw a lot of anti-Islam, anti-Middle Eastern sentiment come from there, and outright blaming it. Now, and obviously the events that followed afterwards, Afghanistan and then Iraq. But I think that it wasn't just a tragedy. I think what's also important as well to understand it, the US, as I said at the start of this video, it doesn't need an excuse to attack everyone. Iraq was on the cards for ages, so was Afghanistan, right? Because they need to destabilise the regions around the world. And back then, I think they even saw the rising influence of China, so they had to move in then and there in the early 2000s. Obviously, the expense of all of Afghanistan, the human cost of it, both on allied troops and also on the civilian side, has been astronomical. And what we also too saw was the flooding of the world illegal drug of heroin coming back into our respective countries. Actually, we're under the Taliban. I'm not praising the Taliban one little bit, but under them, they actually got rid of the poppy or opioid production. Actually, on the request of the US as well. They got rid of it. Well, even though we're going to get funding, they got nothing. So they're out of that. And at that time, after 9/11, the Taliban agreed to actually hand over Osama bin Laden. But you didn't know that. Well, if you did, good. But yeah, they agreed to. We've got him. We can actually hand him over. We know exactly where he is. We can hand him over to you. But no, George W. Bush didn't listen, or it wasn't just him. Well, all the various actions of the ruling class said, no, go in, take it. That's what they did. Like people would have said, oh, it was over oil or resources, not primarily. So yes, Afghanistan's got a lot of rare earths, got a lot of all sorts of minerals and that as well. But look, if that was all that about, we would have seen drill rigs and mining companies moving in by now. They would have moved in a long time ago, but we haven't seen that. In fact, what we've seen the increase of opioid production again through the poppy fields, and we've also seen illegal weapon trading and human trafficking as well. Human trafficking was rife after the dismantling of the USSR and the whole Eastern Bloc collapsing. In Europe, it really took off during the 90s. It was a lot more. It was a worldwide market, and out of oil and the traditional big export markets around the world, you got those three: illegal weapons, as in drugs, and human trafficking as well. That came about, and obviously slave markets, etc. Now, what we've had, and we've seen the consistent destabilising of that region even more so. And actually, if you do get that serious buy that purchase the Looming Tower, they said, well, if you do, even back then, they said, if you get Osama bin Laden back then, just cut the head off the snake, it'll increase tenfold. And obviously, it has happened as well. We saw the rise of ISIS back early last decade, and it came out of Libya, etc., fully CIA backed and funded as well. So we've seen all that rise out of it. So the events leading right up to now, it hasn't been just like a one-off event. It just didn't suddenly things happen. And obviously, what we're seeing right now is the decline of the US empire. I think it cost them big time. And actually, now the Trump administration's actually turned around about Afghanistan and obviously explain what it's come. The truth's coming out, and even here in Australia, a lot of families that had their family members killed in Afghanistan, they served in the Australian military, are now deeply upset. They basically were lied to about Afghanistan. Unfortunately, a lot of people did believe a lot of the hype, and it was. They thought, oh yeah, we're in there to do the right thing and get the terrorists out of there. Well, actually, they eventually got Osama bin Laden. And they took their time doing it, not our troops, but the Americans. And what did we see? And obviously after that, World War, we were still there. And obviously war crimes, a whole lot, they were committed atrocities, all came out. And now what we see is a complete basket case of a nation state. Now, and obviously we've seen that with Iraq as well. Prior to 1991, it had a reasonable, quite high standard of living. Now look at it, got blasted to bits. It was a hotbed of terrorism as well after it, etc. What did we achieve out of this? So for you and I, nothing. Little. For the wealthy multinationals and for destabilisation projects on behalf of one section of the ruling class, up for them. And that's all that came out of it. So obviously the struggle now against imperialism has intensified even more so than it was over 20 years ago. That's where we're at the moment. It's obviously good lessons to learn from this as well, from the past. I think, but we were looking back at what happened then. But always understand how events happen. Look up to the lead up to it as well. Look up to what happened, where we are now, how we came to here in the first place. Don't just say sort of like we just suddenly come here. This is where the dialectical, the Marxists look at things as how we got to here in the first place. Look at where the deeper understanding of it as well, where we're going. And this is where it's excellent having Marxism, Leninism, scientific socialism guiding us, moving forward as well. We don't just keep looking back. Yes, we do for history, how we got to here, and now what we need to do to prepare ourselves to move forward as well. On another note, from 9/11, I just want to talk about a little bit what's happening around in Australia at the moment. I think with the current situation with COVID-19, Victoria's still in lockdown. Obviously, Melbourne's still in stage 4. As most likely tomorrow night, we'll be lifting restrictions here in regional Victoria, depending on how many COVID-19 cases. So I think a couple of regions, Geelong and Colac, will still be under a level 3 lockdown, but the rest of the regions will start being lifted. Now, what I'm also seeing too is the fight between within the ruling circles as well. Obviously, you've seen the politics played out here, and I think what we're understanding, Caleb Morton hit the nail right on the head about the factions of the ruling class fighting each other. You have the wealthy on one side, which is in the US is represented by Trump, and the super wealthy on the other. The super wealthy wants to push the wealthy out. And we're seeing this here exactly playing out in Australia as well. And you look at the various political persuasions that hold both in federal and state parliaments. You've got a federal Conservative government or Liberal National Government coalition attacking Labor governments in Queensland, Victoria, and Western Australia predominantly. Because of border lockdowns because of lockdowns and border closures as well, but praising the Liberal Premier and Liberal government, New South Wales and South Australia, etc. What that comes to show, it's just, as I said, there's the two factions in the ruling class. You've got the super wealthy and you've got the wealthy. A lot of them, the wealthy, have been pushed out. We're seeing this here now in an airplane played out in Australia. And it also shows in Australia, there is no systematic plan to deal with a pandemic at all. Okay, it was all thrown onto us. There's been a little 3 generations ever since we dealt with a pandemic, so it's not like everyone was an expert on it. But the problem we've got now is that pushed by a section by the wealthy trying to open everything up, get everything back going again, and they also claim to speak on behalf of workers. Well, look, all my fellow workers out there, the wealthy do not speak for us. I know we do need to get control of our agenda, and that's what we need to do at this very time, to get control of the agenda, because the capitalist class, it comes to show, hasn't got a solution to COVID-19, how to deal with it. All they're seeing, and one section is how they can profiteer out of it. The other section is trying to see how they're going to survive it. That's what you're seeing. So that section of the capitalist class is how much more profit we can make out of it. Jeff Bezos, we'll use him out of Amazon. He'd love to push the smaller, and he's pushing the smaller players out of the industry. He's going to be the main man for warehousing and distribution of everything. Everything you need, you go to Jeff Bezos' Amazon. Everything's there for your need. Don't worry about everybody else. He's making massive profits out of this. So is the tech companies as well, the Googles of the world, Apples and all that, etc. They're making fortunes out of this. Murdoch Media, obviously, he's trying to make his dominance of the world media more so predominant. That's why he's trying to attack Facebook, and he's attacking all other sort of social media platforms as well, because he knows he's under threat. His newspaper sales has fallen down here in Australia. It was funny, I was in the local supermarket the other day and in newsagents. Hardly anyone's touching these newspapers, surprisingly enough. They just keep building up, more or less. And they're actually woeful newspapers as well. They're completely atrocious. They're garbage, trash. I get more out of reading junk mail than I do out of than I would reading Murdoch's media as well. So he's on the attack, and this is what the imperialists do. This is the section in the imperial class to try to fight for their dominance and stay there. It's not bad. Embarrassing. And stop there and completely keep their dominance of the world, to keep the rest of the world poor and destabilised, so they can keep extracting further and further profit and to maintain that profit as well. Now, I just sort of read out and give you a little demonstration about the complete calamity of not having a proper plan to deal with COVID-19. Now, in Australia here, we've got what we call the Financial Review, or the Fin Review, we call it. Our friends at the Fin, it's a Fairfax paper. And just to read out the joke about this, I'll read it out, the little article. It goes, Queensland's refusal to let a Canberra woman bury her father has flamed the dispute over arbitrary border closures, escalating a push from government and business for the adoption of a nationally consistent system of coronavirus hotspots rather than blanket bans. It has also further poisoned relations between Scott Morrison and Queensland Premier Anastasia Palaszczuk, who accused the Prime Minister of bullying and intimidating her after he rang to plead the case of the woman named Sarah Kasem. In doing so, Ms Palaszczuk, who is expected to keep her borders closed to New South Wales and the ACT until at least the October 31st state election, absolved herself of any responsibility for the funeral ban by revealing she had delegated powers over borders to her Chief Health Officer, Jeanette Young. It was not my decision, the Premier said. The fresh explosion coincided with the launch of a new campaign by Qantas, yes, Qantas, which involved writing to selected state and federal MPs in Queensland, Western Australia, Tasmania, and South Australia. I wonder who they were, urging them to open up each other and other low-risk jurisdictions, such as the ACT and New South Wales, by adopting a nationally consistent set of border protocols. We have a situation where there are large numbers of states and territories that have had 0 cases, and they're not even open to each other, said Qantas Chief Executive Alan Joyce. Should put in brackets, parasite. Western Australia, South Australia, the Northern Territory, Queensland, Tasmania, we've got closures there still with very low cases. No cases, and it's been like that for a while, and we don't have any determination on when the borders will open. The airline tourism industry are also frustrated with Dr. Young, who they believe is overly cautious. One industry source said that at the Tourism Events Economic Recovery Group, and I'll repeat that, the Tourism Events Economic Recovery Group, gosh, they get better, meeting a week ago, convened by the Queensland Government. I'll turn to page 6. I love the finger review when they put things down here. They want to just keep it all on one page. Okay. And attended by dozens of industry representatives. Dr. Young expressed alarm at the numbers of people flying from Sydney to Ballina for a holiday in Byron Bay. For those of you who don't know where Ballina is, it's on the far north coast of New South Wales. Beautiful spot. Love it, man. The far north coast is lovely up there. But even though the tourists were still in New South Wales, Dr. Young noted they were too close for comfort. A comment which gave those in the room little hope that Queensland will be open anytime soon. Mr. Morrison said that it made no sense to not let Miss Casey attend her father's funeral, given that she came from Canberra, which had not had a coronavirus infection for 62 days and had not had a case of community transmission for 145 days. Okay. She had tried to visit her father before he died, but approval took 20 days. Now, I won't continue reading that article, even more. It'll be here forever and a day. But explain it. Oh, Jacob, I'll just do that little demonstration. Alan Joyce, okay, he is the executive of Qantas, our national airline carrier. It used to be a lot more publicly owned until it was privatised. Anyway, what that comes to show is these factions. Here we've got the capitalist class in the tourism industry wants everything open again. Now, let's face it, tourism is not going to lead the economic recovery as well. But obviously, the airline industry as well, they're feeling the pinch. They order all these big super duper Airbuses. You can carry, God knows, hundreds of people in them now, more so than the old Boeing 747. I'll go a minute. It's a lovely looking jet, the 747. But in the end of the day, all they care about is packing people back on planes and flying them wherever and just making profit. They're not interested in about the general health and well-being of the population in general. Yes, look, the economy is something we need to grapple our hands on, and we do need to come up with our own working class plan moving forward. That's what it needs. To leave it up to the capitalist class to make this decision, I wouldn't. I don't trust them as far as I can throw them. They don't have a solution to anything. All they're concerned about is making profit wherever they can. They need to get everything going to make profit once more. And I think it just clearly showed that article. Yes, it's a tragedy what happened to that woman. Not able to bury her father in Queensland. But it just comes to show just the state of affairs in Australia, that our system here is clearly not working. It's a capitalist system. And look, just to demonstrate the two major parties, the Liberal National Coalition or parties and the Labor Party, they're both bourgeois party, capitalist parties. They represent the two factions. They represent the two factions of the same class of people, right? Predominantly. Yes, the trade unions are historically attached to the Labor Party, look. I'm going to put this too as well. Let's be realistic. There actually are a lot of good rank and file members of the Labor Party. I do work with them. And a lot of them are in there for genuine reasons as well, to try and seek some change through there as well. And but I find them actually some of them quite down to earth, and they're quite willing to work with anyone. I don't sit there and just denunciate anyone because they're a member of the Labor Party. Look, you've found that, you guys, in the US as well. You probably find rank and file members of the Democrats who are quite good to work with as well. So That's and then they've got some there for good, genuine reasons as well. They want good change for the benefit of all of us. But predominantly the Labor Party represents a particular part of the capitalist class. Lenin actually described the Labor Party, interesting in his work on Australia, which was written in 1913. There was the Labor Party was around at the time when it first formed its government, and it just recently lost a federal election. And he says, isn't it strange where just recently we had a so-called Workers' Party and controlled both houses of Parliament, and the capitalist system was not faced a threat at all. Even that Workers' Party still controls the upper house, or the Senate, as we call it here. The capitalist system is not threatened by its class rule at all. So, in fact, what it is that the Labor Party is a liberal bourgeois party, where, in fact, our liberals are conservatives. So, for those of you in the US and Canada, sorry about the confusion there, but when we use liberals here, actually, that's all the Liberal Party. It's actually a conservative party. If you want to put it this way, like the British do call the Tory Party now, but we don't use that term, that much here in Australia. So that's but they represent the liberal bourgeoisie. They represent the manufacturing. They represent the other sections of the wealthy, etc., etc. And some of the super wealthy as well. So they represent that part, where the conservative section represents for example, mining capital, agricultural capital. They actually also other sections like what we just talked about there, some of the transport side, etc. So there are those two factions here in Australia playing it out. And what the basic is when it comes down to federal elections, when this stands to the two-party thing, well, basically what you're seeing is who's going to arrest executive control of the capitalist system, who can manage it on behalf of the capitalist class. And that's what we're seeing here in Australia. Murdoch, for example, is more or less represented by the Liberal National parties as well, and he's completely reactionary as well. So just to explain a little bit of Australia, we don't have any consistent plan. Scientific engineering type plan that benefits, so we don't allow this spread. Now, interesting when they're saying about 62 days here or 145 days, or whatever, no cases there. You ever remember, even though it was only a few people in New Zealand only recently were diagnosed with COVID-19. Now, they went 100 days clear without any cases at all. So how the hell did they all of a sudden had this virus arise again? We were a few people. Yes, New Zealand went back into trial, I think mainly around Auckland, I'm led to believe. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. However, even it might be that we might have no cases, say for example, 3 months. It's not to say that virus can appear again. So I think it's all this rush to get back. I can understand it, and look, from a working class perspective, it is hurting everyone as well. And bugger what the wealthy is. I'm bugger both factions. They can go to hell. We need to actually come up with our own plan, our own concrete plan, so we can benefit from a recovery, not for what the capitalist class thinks. So these questions are obviously going to be raised. I'm not a medical expert, so look, don't ask me about medical expertise. But I'm going to say this though. I mean, look. For the capital, in regards to a capitalist resolution to this, or to a capitalist problem, I'm the sort of person that if I want to know how to build a ship, I wouldn't ask a marshmallow maker. Yes? If I want to know how to build a ship, I wouldn't ask a marshmallow maker. Well, I'm certainly not going to ask the capitalist class how we're going to move forward with this as well. I'd rather deal with the medical experts, the biological scientists, etc. So I believe in science and engineering. Not so much a capitalist wish list of how we're going to get these things working again. So, and obviously, I believe in a working class solution stemming from medical and professional and scientific advice in engineering as well. Now, the other thing as well, it just comes to say the calamity of the state systems and the federal systems. Now, we have state governments. We have 6 state governments and 2 territory governments. And obviously, it's a leftover from British colonial days. And obviously, in 1901, January the 1st, 1901, we federated as a nation. The idea was to administer British capital at the time. So we don't have state tariffs, border crossings, etc., on goods moving between. Then it was British colonies, but now and now through states. So that was obviously the Minister about British Capital that would come in the Australian administration. They obviously looked after foreign affairs, military, and a few other things as well. Where in the states, predominantly the business was done there, predominantly through New South Wales and Victoria. So it was actually, when you look at things, the premiers of both New South Wales and Victoria can rival the Prime Minister in power if they want. Now, but we never had an actual proper uniform way of going about things. I won't go into about railway gauges, but we certainly had different railway gauges. We had different everything. We didn't have one national health system. We didn't have one national education system even. We had different industrial relations systems. So the whole thing was just a complete calamity. The idea to have a unified nation was always a dream of many through the 1800s and right to up to now, and still ongoing. But this is also an effect of what happens when a pandemic, something like this arises. It just shows the systematic failure of the capitalist system in Australia here as well. We've got three levels of government: federal, state, and local. And the question's actually always put forward: why have we got state? Do we really need to continue on with it? Mind you, if we got rid of state governments, we could certainly be saving ourselves billions of dollars a year, and we can have a proper uniform system across the board. This is something where we've got a hangover from the past, and we need to deal with. But look, the best way forward for us is a working class, and I'm directing a lot of my videos now to working class people. How we need to organise, what we need to do. We need to come up with our own systematic plan, our own alternative moving forward. Not rely on the likes of Alan Joyce, the CEO of Qantas. Nor we're going to rely on Rupert Murdoch, and that's best advice. We don't rely on him, or on the big banks, oil companies, mining, etc., etc., etc. Let's not rely on them at all. They're not going to come up with anything. Yes, solar workers say, well, they provide employment. Yes, they do, but they don't generate wealth either. And when they come up with these solutions, it's for their class interests. It's not up for our interests at all. And in fact, if what happens if COVID-19 then broke out tenfold, or even worse than what we had? I mean, for Australia, we had it relatively under control compared to other countries. UK, US, India now there's a powder keg, and also Brazil, for example, and Sweden. People say the death rate was low in Sweden. Wrong. It's actually quite high. There's a lot of stuff you're not hearing either. So going on to that, we get things under control. We know them perfect, but we need to get control of the agenda. There was rallies the other day. I'm not going to comment on that, but what's we're planning out here is the fight between the capitalist class. What we need to do now is get ourselves prepared and start ourselves organised moving forward. And I'll keep emphasising that over and over and over. This is a working class solution, and the guidance of Marx, Engels, Lenin, House, everyone, all previous revolutionaries have gone before us, have given us some great guides for us, socialists and communists, Marxists, anyone, of course, or genuine people who give a damn, who really give a shit about things to move forward as well. And I think it's vitally important that we do need to work out something together amongst ourselves. It's got to be a collective thing. It's not an individualistic thing moving forward. But look, to rely on that, to rely on other sources to come up with solutions, no. And look, the other thing was also we're coming up with solutions and moving away forward. We can't afford to be a debating society. I'm not interested in debating societies. If I want to see a debating society, I'll go to a university and debate. And they're very entertaining in general. So, but I think what we need to do, we got to stop turning into that, and a little less law. We can put in some practical things. We can move forward as well. And look, some of the unions are coming up with some great stuff. And my union, the AMW's got some great policy about recovery and manufacturing as well. I believe the CFMU construction division is coming up with some interesting stuff on for construction as well, and that. So, yeah, another unions as well coming up with some good solutions on things. And actually, another union I'd like to acknowledge, the UW, coming up a great one about actually having clauses in agreement so factories do close down, the workers have got a right to take it over, which is actually policy of our union. It's a branch here in Victoria, really good policy, and especially because factory closures and that do affect people a lot more, especially a lot more in regional areas than, say, capital cities. So that's where we're at with this week's court. So I also want to just over the last week, we had a very interesting, something different and not cheerful. I had an excellent Zoom in meeting on, I think it was Tuesday night, in relation to Venezuela. It was an international Zoom-in meeting with trade unions from Venezuela. It was hosted by the Venezuelan consulate here in Australia, and actually we had the letter here, and it was great participation and what they come up with. And I'll just take a little bit back. Early this year in January, there was a big international meeting in Venezuela. A lot of good comrades from all around the world. Talking about how we're going to prop up a worldwide anti-imperialist agenda, the United Fronts Against Imperialism, Fascism. And there's a great little book here, booklet they come up with. I don't know if you can see it properly. Sorry about the bright light. It's anti-imperialist working class platform. Working class platform, not middle class, not intellectual, none of that. Our platform. And this was actually generated from working class people in Venezuela, put forward to all of us. And there's going to be in late October, there's going to be another international meeting via Zoom. It's great doing this by Zoom. So if you can't afford to fly anywhere, or can't anywhere, at least we can now communicate around the world with each other. I think it's a great way to move forward. And if I get more details for it, I'll certainly put it forward. A lot of it was in Spanish, and I am trying to learn it slowly but surely. Learn Spanish. It's not easy for me to learn another language, but it's and they also have English as well for those of you who are having trouble understanding, and they'll translate. And it's got, obviously, audio stuff has to be improved there. But there was something really good out of that. I think putting a good working class agenda forward internationally for all of us. We are an international movement, one way or the other. It was what we used to say, what used to be said to me. You think globally, you act locally. So what we can do within our own material conditions, our respective countries, our localities, etc., what needs to do moving forward. And there were some good ideas put forward as well. Some concrete, practical things we can put forward. Without workers taking over factories, I'll do another video about that. But just take a little back in time, and early 2000s, there was a documentary on Argentina about the movement there of workers taking over factories. I shared something on Facebook the other day about that. And that's a way forward for all of us. I want to do a lot more talk, but that was actually put forward. In Venezuela, they're doing the same as well. And I think that's something we can campaign in our respective countries, that if a factory closes down for whatever reason, wants to move offshore, or just wants to go broke, whatever, well, the workers working, they've got the right to take it over. No machinery, nothing will be moved out. And the community, it's workers themselves and their community have got the right to take it over. And I think it's a good campaign to have and that helps us, and that helps us moving forward. It also helps workers to develop further, to have more interest in economic issues, to how to run things. Because us workers, we run everything anyway. We practically do. We don't need the capitalist class. We do run everything. Without them, we can live without them, and that's why these workers in Argentina that were coming to. Well, we don't need the boss. The boss needs us. We don't need him. And exactly that resonates all around the world. So that's something we're worthwhile. A lot more discussions moving further. So I want to keep these videos down to about an hour, just give and take a few minutes. By the way, look, just going over what I've said in the last hour as well. We've obviously, we've around this time at the moment, 9/11, big event that happened in world history. Certainly a lot of lessons to be learned about that. There was also the other 9/11 in Chile. And also, we just talked about the 20th anniversary of blockading the World Economic Forum and the building of working class power as well through that. And obviously, leading up to recent events with COVID-19, and just shows you it's just ripped right open, exposed the whole capitalist system for what it is. And it's obviously capitalism has not got human interest at heart at all. Look, and once again, if you want to, I'm quite keen to do some more live studies. I did a live study with Dus James not so long ago with the history of the three internationals by William Z. Foster. Still recommend that book. If you haven't got it, Google it, order it. It's a fantastic read, a great introduction to Marxism. It shows you dialectical and historical materialism in practice. Marxist philosophy in word, matter in motion, and it's a great read. It's a thick book to read through, but it's great, and you get the whole history, and it actually helps explain well where we're at now as well. And then it finished off about the mid 1950s. From then on, there's a lot more, and obviously a lot more world events after that we're all well aware of. However, it's a great read. I highly recommend that as well. But look, if you want you to put your names in the comment. if you wish to put it in the comment, or if you're a friend of mine on Facebook, just send me a message, or me on Facebook. Or if you're not a friend of mine on Facebook, send me a friend request, or even just send me a message. You'll see my pictures. They're actually a fox's head, and so yeah, if you want to wish to do so, I'd be quite keen as much to do. Even with Dust James here, if you're keen to do another study on another particular subject, I'm glad to do another live stream with yourselves. But look, that concludes this week. I've got a few things to do today. We've actually got a massive. We're going to go later this afternoon. I'm not here to do a weather report, but we've obviously got a big storm coming through. We're going to get a lot of rain, so I need to get a few things done around the place, and also ring up a union member as well. He sent me a message last night with a few concerns at his job. So that concludes tonight, this week. Wish you all the very best. I'll be back again next Saturday morning, Australian Eastern Standard Time at 9 o'clock anymore. And also, too, if you want me to discuss something, feel free to send me a message. Once again, I'll end it off for dare to struggle, dare to win. We don't fight, we lose. Thank you.